In the last video, we explored the ancient pagan anthropology. What's the message of Genesis? If we contrast Genesis with the Numa Elish, we get a deeper grasp of the genius of Genesis. If we read the text, we can ask ourselves, why did God create the earth? Why did God create humanity? What sort of a world, what sort of people did God create? In the Genesis story, in contrast to the pagan stories, God didn't make things because God needed them for his own fulfillment or for his own purposes. There was no need in God that prompted him to create. God wasn't forced to create the earth or humans. There was no utilitarian benefit for God out of creation. There were no evil forces waging war against God, and there was certainly no evil forces involved in the creation of human beings. The radical message of Genesis, and I'd like you to bear in mind how radical it is. We take it for granted because many of us have heard these stories since we were very young. But in the context of the ancient Near East, this message ran completely counter to the religious expectations of other people of the ancient Near East. That radical message was that God, the God of Israel, had created human beings and our world through his own utterly free decision. And furthermore, God created us out of nothing but his unbounded divine love. In contrast to the Akkadian gods who made the world to get even with their enemies and who made the humans to be slaves, our God made our world and made us out of outright, utter goodwill, that is, love. And importantly, the God of Israel didn't make creation to be expendable tools. What God made was good. You hear that over and over in the Genesis narrative. God saw that what he made was good. The statements repeated. God saw what he had made, and it was good. You can ask yourself, how could something made by an unrestricted free act of love be anything but good? And something else to note is that when God created human beings, male and female, he looked down on his creation and he saw that it was very good. Now, the reason that after the creation of humanity, creation became very good is because of probably, to me, the most radical statement of the Genesis account. In Genesis 1:27, we read that God created man in the image of himself. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And for us, this is the critical part of creation. Now, many cultures have an idea of humanity as having something godlike about themselves. But the biblical message is that God is not just the creator of humanity, and that we're not just created with godlike qualities, but that human beings are made in the very image and likeness of God. I think it helps to note that the Hebrew word for image here is tselem. It's the same word used to mean an image of God, such as an idol. The Greek translation of the Old Testament uses the word icon, which more or less means what we mean by icon today. In other words, what Genesis is saying is that in a human person, we're supposed to see an image and likeness of God's own qualities. And here's something which is radical and subversive. That story is not just about people created many thousands or millions of years ago. It's a story which is meant to be meaningful for each and every one of us today. That's vital. The Genesis account was not just written to talk about the creation of a couple of people or a few individuals some years ago. The stories are not just about past people, but they're about you and I, all people, past, present, and future. And that's a radical message. one of the most radical parts of Christian belief, that every human being is made, created in the image and likeness of God. This means that we're created in God's own image and likeness, created to share something of God in our own nature. Now, of course, that's not to say that we fully share God's own nature. We're not gods. But it means that being made in the image of God, humanity is the pinnacle of creation. And being at the pinnacle, the crown of creation, means that we have dominion over all creation. In fact, in the same breath as God says, "Let us make man," God also says, "Let them have dominion over all creation." So far from being slave tenants, God has made us with the right to the earth as our own. But there's an important element of that that's sometimes forgotten. We are made free and responsible for the earth. Being made in God's image, we're called to reflect God's own qualities of mercy, fidelity, justice, and equity. Our dominion over creation, then, as images of God, is not meant to be a dictatorship, but it's a vocation. It's not just about rights to creation, but to duties and responsibilities as well. In other words, we are responsible for ourselves and also responsible for the rest of creation. And a point often missed when we consider our creation in the image of God is that we are given effective control over our destiny. We have God-given freedom. If we read the myths of the ancient Near East, we find that the people who are seen as slaves of the gods had destinies or fates controlled by the whims of the gods. The genius of Genesis is that human beings, as images of God, had dominion over creation and actually shared the freedom and responsibility of God. We are created as free beings. God is the supremely free being. We are made in God's image. We share in God's freedom. It's a freedom not just to act according to blind forces or instincts, but we are made to be free, responsible people. We can choose to do certain actions or not to do certain actions, and that's what I call horizontal freedom. The ability to make choices between different options at one level. But we also enjoy vertical freedom, the freedom to grow upwards, that is to grow closer to God and realize more and more for ourselves what it means for us to be images and likenesses of God. That's a radical freedom, for example, that animals don't have. And it's something that people didn't think they had in the religions of the ancient Near East. So in other words, God has made us free and responsible. Now, something that goes hand in hand with being created free is that we may truly know and love our God. Because we're made in God's image, we're gifted with an intellect and a gift of affectivity that can understand and know what we can experience. We can grasp and understand and affirm transcendent realities. And we can come to know God. But we can do more than know God. Because we are free, we can achieve our highest potential, which is to love God and love others. We can love God in return for all that He's done for us. Let's put it this way. If we weren't truly free, we really couldn't truly love God. Slaves don't have a genuine love for their masters because their affection is forced. But because we are not slaves, because we are images of God, we share God's own capacities for freedom, of transcending knowledge, of love. Because we are free, we can turn back and in words, thoughts, and actions love our Creator, love God in return, and love those around us the way God does. So the Genesis account of creation isn't, as I said, a scientific account in the way that we understand science today. The aim of the account such as Genesis explains our current existential situation. In other words, The story of Genesis is not just about the past, but it's also about our present, and for that matter, our future. So to speak of creation, and to speak about human creation in a Jewish Christian context, isn't just to inquire about our ancestry, but it's to talk about what is the case for every one of us in our own situation. It wasn't just the first human beings created in the image and likeness of God, but every one of us today is created in that image and likeness of God. You and I, all of us, are created free with the ability to know God and the radical capacity to love God and to love other people. Every one of us has these gifts in our created nature. And this is our destiny as women and men, each one of us. It's something St. Augustine picks up in the opening of his book, The Confessions. All of us have this instinct to turn back and to love God, and to know that despite whatever shortcomings we may have, we somehow remain oriented to God. That's because we are created in God's image and likeness. And to quote Augustine, the thought of you, that is God, stirs man so deeply that he cannot be content unless he praises you, because you have made us for yourself, and our hearts find no peace until they rest in you. So as images of God, as free, responsible people who reflect God, our heart's most basic desire is to become more like God, to be truly, authentically His daughters and His sons.